Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Everyday Equity, Everyday Ways to Make a Change. I am so excited for today's guest, Sandhya Jain Patel. She is amazing. I feel so lucky that I got her on our LinkedIn Live. Um, Sandhya is a DEI plus and multicultural strategy advisor at Culture Prism. And her podcast is also called Culture Prism, and it just launched this week. Welcome, Sandhya. I am so happy to have you. I want to turn it over to you to fully introduce yourself.
Oh, thank you so much, Pooja. It's so wonderful to be here. I'm equally excited to be on Boundless Awareness's platform for today. So thank you for having me. And I think, to your point about the brief introduction and then the longer introduction, the reason why I do what I do is because, like the majority of consumers here in the US, I have grown up as a third culture kid. And I'm sure this will be no surprise to any of your viewers. That identity is not very well represented, if at all, in the storytelling that we've seen around us and that we've grown up with, whether it's TV, movies, books, advertising. And so what I like to do is advise my clients on how to create diverse and inclusive cultures, both internally, if they're talking about their ERG strategy or their marketing strategy, and also externally through using my PRISM method for that authentic multicultural storytelling. And the reason why is because the research shows that the 18 to 39 demographic is majority multicultural in the US, and it's going to be the under 50 demographic very soon. And so if you want to make money, you got to start thinking about how to talk to people like you and I. And so I just find this work incredibly rewarding, and I'm really happy to share it with the world.
Can you let our audience know, in case they don't know what it means to be a third culture kid?
Yeah.
An example of that.
Yeah, third culture means that you're really neither here nor there. You're from everywhere and from nowhere, right? So for example, my parents are Indian immigrants. I was born in the US, first generation, as I refer to myself. And actually recently on my podcast, I spoke with a fellow South Asian woman, and we talked about this magical portal that was the front door of our house. And when we walked out of the house, we were in America. And when we walked inside the house through that magical portal, we were in India, or some version of it that our parents had left behind that even didn't exist there. It's their memories and their culture that they grew up with, right? So being that third culture kid, which I know resonates so much with so many of us, means that you grew up with a set of verbal and nonverbal language, as well as so many other cues. I mean, I would hesitate to say values, because I think values are fairly aligned across generations. That's just a cultural thing that gets passed down. But in terms of how to interact with people, that is a strange thing.
So many stories. Friends walking into my house and being like, "Why does it smell like this?" And I'm like, "Smell like what?"
Correct.
And I remember, I had this partner in earth science, lab partner, and we had to work on a worksheet after school, and he called home and my dad picked up. And then the next day, it's just so mortifying, but it's also it's not, anyway, it's that person's problem and not mine. But the next day, we were in class, and he was making fun of the way my dad sounds. And I was shocked. I was like, I've never heard him sound like that. That is, and I think that was ninth grade. So I think that was the first time I understood that there's a difference between my reality and other people's perception. And
yes. And that perception is formed by the storytelling that surrounds us, right? So if you've never met an Indian person, but you've seen Indian people portrayed on television, you're going to, and those are obviously going to be caricatures and not based in reality or truth whatsoever. That's going to be your perception of what an Indian person sounds like, right? It's the same thing for any intersectional identity, not just race and ethnicity, but ages, genders, sexuality, etc., right? These whole caricatures around butch dykes and, all of that information. Where do we get that from? We get that from the storytelling that is often created by people without representatives from those identities in that room.
Mm.
And it happens all the time. We see it all the time.
I mean, it still blows my mind. I'm like, my house smells like what?
I'm so
My
sorry
house
that happened
isn't,
to you.
it's like,
Yeah.
or, before, people come over and, your mom lights agarbatti and you're like, this is the best smell in the world.
Yeah.
Like, how come your house doesn't smell like that? You know?
And now everybody wants to do it because of like yoga and whatever, right? So
Yeah, right. Which at that time, and, that wasn't a thing.
that's
I
right.
mean, Madonna wore a bindi at a concert, and all of a sudden we were like, oh my gosh, they know about us.
It's at that time, I remember, yes, to your point, like seeing someone appropriate our culture just felt like we were being seen and we didn't actually examine the messaging or the meaning or the consequences of how they were misappropriating our culture and what they were using it as a symbol of or as a portrayal of what story to tell. And now when I even hear people say like, oh, they're a marketing guru, I'm like, oh, really? Which ashram did they study with in India?
Yeah,
Right?
yeah,
Like what guru shishya lineage were they a part of? Because if you don't know, don't say it. Right?
yeah.
Like,
And it's
stop
not guru.
appropriating. It's not a
Say it
guru.
right. Oh gosh, so many things. And you're right. Like when there was just a portrayal, and even such a negative, like The Simpsons, and such a
Yeah.
negative portrayal of us. Yeah, we were seen. We were finally like, oh, they see us. They know we're alive and here. But the people who felt the consequences was people like you and me. Like our parents weren't feeling those consequences. They were
That's
like,
right.
yeah, whatever.
That's right. That's
They
right.
want to do yoga, that's great. Let all these white people do yoga. And it's like, no, 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 that's not, we're not having the same experience.
We're not having the same experience.
Oh my gosh. Okay, so I want to ask you, I know we've kind of gotten into something pretty deep right now, but I want to dial it back
Yeah.
and talk about what DEI work means to you. Why is it meaningful for you? What does it mean in your profession, in your day to day? How are you integrating this?
Yeah. I mean, I think with DEI, what it means to me is being seen, being heard, and feeling a sense of belonging, right? So, and a lot of people can relate to this, and a lot of people can't relate to this, but being the one and the only in so many rooms and being mistaken for the other brown woman in so many situations is exhausting, right? And it shouldn't happen. And that's why, even so, a couple of examples. When I was in grad school, my second grad school, because I did a lot of schooling when I was younger, I was at a conference, and the only other South Asian woman in all of the schools that were teaching fine art conservation, she got up and gave a lecture. And she's Bengali. She looks nothing like me. She's got curly hair. I've got straight hair. Well, straightish hair. We look very different.
Yeah.
We were wearing different things. After the presentation, I was walking to the restroom and a guy comes running up to me and says, how do you spell anastylosis? And I'm like, what? And he's like, that talk you just gave, how do you spell anastylosis? And I said, oh no, you're talking about the other brown girl. And all of my friends who are with me, who are white, were like, oh my God, I can't believe you said that. I'm like, I can't believe you said that to me. Why would he tell
Yeah.
me or think that, like, anyway,
Right.
so that was the first sort of trigger point, even in education when I was in grad school. The second trigger was in Christie's when I was the head of the Indian, Himalayan, and Southeast Asian department there.
Mm-hmm.
And I was one of maybe 3 brown women, again, who worked at the organization in New York. And I left an envelope at the front desk, and my friend, my other brown friend, happened to walk by, and they said, oh, that person never came. Here, take the envelope. She's like, I have no idea what you're talking about. And they said, you left this here. And she said, no, that wasn't me. It was Sandhya. And they're like, yeah, you're Sandhya. They were telling her who she was. I mean, the audacity, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was going to say cognitive dissonance, but yes, the audacity.
Right. And I think for me, that's the trigger point of saying, okay, like I got to stop and educate these people. So before DEI was even part of the common vocabulary, that was a calling that I felt right away. And so when I talk about incorporating that into my profession, it's, yes, I'm a DEI practitioner, but DEI is really something that everybody should be focused on. Everybody should be thinking about how they in their profession can work towards furthering diversity and inclusion and hopefully equity in their organizations. Because again, the multicultural majority is here. And so either you got to do it or you're just going to be insignificant within the next 5 minutes, essentially, right? And so when I talk to people who are either DEI practitioners themselves or marketing people or storytellers, et cetera, museums, anybody, I just raise those questions. Like, have you thought about expanding the gender binary that is in your story right now? Have you thought about maybe not having all the people in this around this table be Hispanic? Can we think of including somebody else at the table? You know, things like that. Just and it's oftentimes, again, unconscious biases and these blinders that we all have on, and it's part of who we are and how we function as humans, and there's nothing wrong with that. But raising the awareness around those blinders and then making a different choice based on that new information is where I try to educate my clients.
And who are the clients that you're that you have in mind when you have these values and ideals in your head? Who are you targeting?
Anybody who's telling a story. So obviously, largely marketing professionals. I have also worked with Hollywood movies when they want to portray South Asian people, or TV shows, script analysis, books. I do a lot of sensitivity readings. And this is not to say that somebody has to be of that culture to be the creator of the work. I actually prefer for them to be cognizant of the fact that they need to have someone in the room to represent that creation. And so they bring in, or I help to bring in through my PRISM process, what is the point of this work? What is the relationship between the creator and the audience? Where is that identity piece coming in? How is that going to be portrayed or not portrayed, but just we know that it exists, right? What are those intersectional identifiers of the characters in your story? And then how can we make this messaging, bringing all of those pieces in, how can we make the messaging more targeted towards your audience? And when I say that, I also don't mean that you have to write copy or stories for every single intersectional identity of your audience, because I don't have to be Korean to know that you are portraying that Korean family with a stereotype. But I will know if you are portraying that story with authenticity, because you're no longer using the same stereotype to show them as you would to show another Asian person, right? We can smell this stuff a mile away. We can tell when somebody's actually speaking to and incorporating someone of that identity into the storytelling or not. And so what I try to do is explain to them, let's go through and identify what your KPIs are. What are you exactly trying to achieve with this piece of content? And then let's find someone who can answer specific questions, because again, we don't want to ask someone else to re-traumatize themselves by telling their entire story. We have to be very sensitive and very targeted with how we bring in cultural, cultural advisors or experts of different types of identities before we then figure out that final message.
You know what I've found lately in some shows that I've been watching? There's one that comes to mind right now is Loot on Apple TV with Maya Rudolph and Joel Kim Booster.
Okay.
And they're at, and MJ Rodriguez. And there I feel like you have Maya Rudolph, who's Black, Joel Kim Booster, who's adopted and Korean, and MJ Rodriguez, who's a trans woman and Latina. And you do not have we do not have to suffer, the audience, watching the the stereotypical oppression that each of these marginalized identities have had in their history to enjoy a comedy that is like sweet and hilarious and like really authentic. And I feel like if I'm not seeing like the worst oppression that we like historically have known about this identity, you're doing a good job.
Yeah,
we all have regular lives as well.
Yeah, we don't need to indulge in trauma porn. You know,
yeah, that's it.
that time is over. Like, yes, there are stories that need to be told. Don't get me wrong. I will give a counterpoint example, which is when I first saw the Watchmen television show. Do you remember
Oh
the
yeah,
TV
yes,
show?
I saw it.
And they dedicated a couple of episodes to the Tulsa massacres. And I literally turned to my partner and I said, is this history or is this made up? Because it had never been taught to me in school, right? I didn't know about the Black Wall
all of us
Street.
learned. Yes.
Yeah. So in that case, unfortunately, the trauma porn had to exist, but the effect of that has been exponential. So many people have learned about something that happened in history that we didn't know about. And now folks are actually trying to do something about reparations, digging up the mass graves so that they can return the remains to the rightful family members, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, there's an uncovering of this blight in American history that I think was important. Unfortunately, it had to be done through sensitive storytelling.
Yeah. And admiring the brilliance and success of marginalized groups. Like, it's not all horrific.
Yeah.
It's both at the same time. I mean, they both existed in the same moment.
That's right.
Or in Miss Marvel, did you see Miss Marvel?
Oh yeah, yeah.
Learning about, for me, really for the first time seeing it depicted, the genocide of partition. I never expected to be seeing scenes like that in a Marvel-based series, but I learned so much, and it was I felt so well done that and it was integrated into her story of how she got her power.
That's right. That's right. I really appreciated how they were able to show that to us, because if you talk to the elders in our communities who are unfortunately now, passing on, a lot of them don't want to share their stories. They don't want to talk about it because it was so traumatic, and still is. And of course, in our culture, we don't talk about mental health nearly enough. And so they were never able to process that experience. But we're fortunate that there are verbal archives that some organizations have put together. The South Asian Digital Archive, SADA, is one of them. And I think the Marvel people probably used an archive like that to get some information around this. I will say my one criticism, or two criticisms, about Ms. Marvel was there was one moment where and I'm sorry to spoil this for anybody who hasn't seen it, but by now you should have seen it. They descend into like this cave in like a flashback scene, and because I am a historical, like a specialist in the art,
right?
The cave was a hodgepodge of everything Buddhist in South and Southeast Asia. Like, it was, Khmer work next to Gandharan work next to Thai work. And I'm like, there's no such place that exists like this in Pakistan, or, historical Afghanistan, historical Gandhara. So this is wrong. And that was offensive to me as a specialist. I was like, call me. And then secondly, and I don't know if you felt this too, there was one moment where in that same scene, they uncover a body, and the body has blue skin. And, in Hinduism, blue skin is the color of our gods, right? And here we are in a Muslim story. And I did not know anything about Ms. Marvel. I've actually never read the comics, so I went back and read it later a little bit. But that sort of like gut reaction of like, why is a blue skinned god dead? Kind of like threw me off a bit. And I knew that's not what they meant. But again, if they had shown this to a wider audience and like beta tested it amongst different audience members, maybe they would have understood that gut reaction is probably not what they want to go with.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Absolutely. Right. Blue being the color of enlightenment, and yeah. Since we're on the topic of South Asian things, I'd love to talk about, and I feel like we don't talk about this enough in either our work or just generally, of oppression and bias in our own community.
Yeah, it's a big one.
How do we address it? Our parents, I sometimes think of, what our parents, those of us whose parents came in from the Immigration Act of 1965, so in the late 60s, 70s, I feel like they knew everything Indian. That was their childhood, that was their adolescence, that was their early adulthood. And for them, they can never lose that. It's like us,
Yeah.
we can't lose our American accent and knowing English. Like it's just we can't, and they couldn't. So they don't see the value of um, how rich they're as much as we see it because we don't have access. It's such a luxury for us to get the stories and to get like, okay, what was it like growing up there? For
Yeah.
us, which is so important, and um, and at the same time being very critical of India, which seems, at least in my experience, talking with other like Hindu elders. I don't know if we can call our parents elders yet, but those over 70, let's say.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, 70 is like the new 50, I think.
Sure.
But being critical.
Yeah.
And I feel like I am happy to be critical because this is a world global issue. What right wing conservative ways of thinking affects obviously us here in this country
Yep.
and we go back. So what discussions have you encountered? Have you been brave enough to enter into? What kind of experience has it been for you? How do we go about talking about it and being critical?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think you're right. It's hard to do that with your elders because there is a level of in South Asian culture, as you know, just respect and authority that is commanded by and afforded to the older generation, going back to that guru shishya, relationship. And so it's not as easy, I think, to have those kinds of challenging conversations because to do so would be to rock the foundation upon which most of our parents' generation has found success here in America, right? They came here
Mm,
with the ethos of being as white adjacent as possible. And so
right.
by participating in bias and racism and exclusion, as if they were white, allied them to what was the successful class here in America, right? And unfortunately, as we know, in many ways, still is the majority successful class here in America. And now I think what's happening is for folks that are in our generation or younger, we're questioning that because we are not raised with the same, of course, circumstances as our immigrant elders were. And so we're coming here and finding the rules have changed and are different than what
Yes.
right in the late 60s, early 70s, even in the late 70s. And of course, the murders of Breonna Taylor and George Floyd and so many others have been such a flashpoint for folks in many communities to question their relationship between privilege and oppression. And even within our community, I started a South Asian group at my professional organization, and it's called Baatcheet because it's chit chat. Also the name of the princess in Salman Rushdie's book, Haroon and the Sea of Stories, which is one of my favorite books ever. And our first few meetings were about how do we situate our South Asian privilege between, our oppressors and then our BIPOC brothers and sisters and siblings who are less fortunate and have less privilege than we do, right? So it's a continuum. We have more privilege as compared to some, and we have less privilege as compared to others. And so how do we help to bridge that gap? How do we be allies and at the same time help those who have more privilege than us just, again, raise those questions to kind of prick their unconscious biases and point them out and say, how can we all work together for a more inclusive and diverse environment? Because again, the train has left the station, people. We're marching towards we're on an inexorable march towards a multicultural majority. And that's not going to change. So you either got to get on the train or just be irrelevant.
Yeah, it's so funny. Even when we think about like the state of politics now and who's in power in India, and in such a seriously multicultural part of the world.
Yeah.
Hundreds and hundreds of languages, thousands of dialects, so many religions, all built in together, everyone living side by side.
Yep.
It's like we already know, like this country is getting towards being so much more multicultural, but there is already many countries that have not, I don't want to say the word capitalized, but really taken advantage of how beautiful it is to have a multicultural society, and instead has resorted to a type of repression in one form or another. We have a few comments here. I just want to, this is actually really on point. Dorcas Linda saying colorism, anti-blackness, I'm packaging and managing this every day. And to your point, our parents had to align themselves with white adjacent, and it was so. My mom tells me stories of how hard it was, and how she was treated, especially when she was pregnant and in her residency as a brown woman. Just here for 4 or 5 years, and dealing with so much misogyny and so much racism intertwined, and getting through it. And we may not have to align ourselves with white people anymore politically, because we're here and we're born here and we're all those things. But like what Dorcas Linda's saying here, we still have to figure out our own colorism and anti-blackness. So any thoughts on these two topics, which I don't think have been really fleshed out in our generation as yet?
What's interesting about and Dorcas, thank you for watching and contributing that comment, because, oh my God, so much, as you have said, to unpack. The anti-blackness, again, we talked about that with the white adjacency and, having to align themselves with who they perceive to be the successful practitioners here in America, successful business people here in America. The colorism, I don't think anyone can ever escape. It is so hard within our own culture. There's such a vast amount of colorism, right? With the Fair and Lovely products that have gotten such a backlash, even in India, which is great. But in Korean cultures or East or North Asian cultures, there's a fair amount of colorism that exists in South America. I have a guest coming up on my show who is Argentinian, and she's half Middle Eastern, half Italian. Her parents are, and she was called like the Black Turk in Argentina. Shorthand for her. Right, exactly. Like what does that even mean? And she's fairer than you and I put together, but she was still considered to be like the darkie, right, in her community. And so I think there's always going to be a desire to divide people and put them into buckets that we can understand them or think that we understand them, especially when you're confronted with a giant number of people and you have to quickly sort through and figure out who your allies are and who you're going to be friends with and who you're not going to be friends with. But as we ask those questions and get to know people more, I think we find that superficial presentation is not nearly as important as obviously the internal.
We only have a few minutes left, so I really want to talk about culture prism. I know, I could talk to you for like hours. We didn't even get to the things that anyway, it doesn't matter. Oh, another time. Okay, I really want to get to you, one, your podcast, and two, this really important survey. We're going to be posting the link to the survey after show, but please tell us.
Thank you. So the executive compensation survey, I started a member-led initiative within my executive member group in many years ago, for about 4 years. And we had about 2,000 respondents. It was anonymous. And what we quickly learned, and people use this as a negotiation tool to look at people in similar industries, similar job titles, cities, et cetera, and be able to negotiate for better compensation when they were moving jobs. What we quickly realized, this being a women's executive group, that we needed to have information from all genders to actually get to pay equity. And so the Harris Poll, Libby Rodney at the Harris Poll and I have teamed up together a state of executive compensation study that's open to all executives of all races, ethnicities, ages, genders, everybody. We want as much data as we can get so we can have some really robust analysis. And I would welcome all of your listeners to please participate. It's anonymous. The information will be aggregated. We're hoping to share data, raw data quarterly, and then have yearly reports. So please do contribute, because that's how we will get to pay equity and eventually wealth equity as a society. And then, of course, the second thing is my podcast, which launched on Tuesday this week. I'm so excited, Culture Prism. And we interview multicultural women leaders and find out how their superpower of being from third or fourth cultures helps to propel them forward in business, and what storytellers, content creators can learn from them.
Brilliant, brilliant. Sandhya's Instagram is Sandhya MIC. Her LinkedIn is Sandhya-Jain-Patel. And then her website is thecultureprism.com. The podcast is called The Culture Prism. Go and put your information in the Harris poll. The link is there. We're going to be also posted again. Sandhya, I love hanging out with you. Let's do this again.
Do this many times and in real life as well.
Yes.
Thank you so much, Pooja.
Hours of content. Yes. Take care, everybody. We will see you
Thanks,
in 2 weeks. Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.